Coming out this afternoon to hear a little bit more about our topic today, carbon tax. This is something that's been being tossed around here in the state of Vermont. I don't know whether you've heard of it in the past or not. It's also something that we've heard nationally and internationally as well. And so we're fortunate to have two professionals here to tell us a lot more about it, hopefully. And the way this is going to work a little bit differently today in that they're going to be discussing this. They're each going to be given an opportunity to define what carbon tax is for us. And then if you'll notice on your tables, there are little notepads. Please feel free to use those to take notes. And then when it comes to the question and answer, what I'd like to do is have you write down your questions and send them forward, because what we're going to do is we're going to give each one of these gentlemen 2 minutes to answer every single question, so that way they both have an opportunity to answer each and every question that we have. So if you would please just jot your questions down and send them over to this table. I don't know whether you want me to go around and pick them up from you, but I'll be the one to ask the questions here this afternoon. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce to you. We have Ben Walsh here. He is with Vermont Public Interest Research Group, otherwise known as VPIRG. He has been with them since 2012, and he has been leading the energy program for VPIRG. So he's going to be here and telling us, what he has found. And then we also have with us here today Rob Roper, who is returning. He was here with us last year. Rob Roper represents the Ethan Allen Institute, which is a free market think tank, if you will. So what I would like to do is go ahead and open this up. Ben is going to be the first one to speak to us, and then Rob will follow him. So please jot down any notes or questions that you have, and then we will open it up for questions. Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much, Mary Beth. I think just so everyone can see and hear me, I'll stand up here. So as Mary Beth said, my name is Ben Walsh. I work with VPIRG. VPIRG is the state's largest environmental and consumer protection advocacy organization. We have members in just about every city, town, grant, and gore in the state of Vermont. And we're part of the Energy Independent Vermont Coalition. And I mention that because the Energy Independent Vermont Coalition formed recently, actually around this specific topic, around advocating for a state-level carbon pollution tax. Now I'll get to what exactly that is and what specifically our proposal looks like in a minute, but I wanted to just start with a little bit about why we all are advocating for that policy. So we formed, this coalition formed to take on two specific challenges that we saw from the state's dependence on fossil fuels. And those are, of course, climate change, which is sort of the whole point of a carbon pollution tax, is addressing that issue. And two, and just as importantly, we, as Vermonters, individual families, and as a state as a whole, spend way more money than we need to on fossil fuels. Even with today's lower gas prices, Vermonters are still shelling out thousands of dollars every year on fossil fuels, and much of that unnecessarily. So the first problem, global warming, I'll just mention a couple things about. And really for us, the take home here is this is something that Vermonters have already, unfortunately, had a bit of a taste of. And now you can debate whether Irene or the other 100-year floods that we've seen just over the past few years are specifically climate fueled or climate caused. But the science is really clear that that kind of thing has become more common. Extreme weather has become more common, has become more severe, and will continue to become more common, more severe here in Vermont. Now, the Green Mountain State just isn't set up to take 7 or 8 inches of rain in the course of a few hours, as we saw the devastating effect of Irene. So we feel like we as Vermonters have a responsibility, as everyone does, to do what we can to slow down climate change, so that we have fewer Irenes in the future than we might otherwise. Second, wasting money. So we spend as a state and it varies year to year depending on the exact price of oil and gas and the other fossil fuels we use, but about $2 billion a year on heating our homes and getting around with fossil fuels. Now, of course, we need to heat our homes. It's cold in the winter. We need to get around. We're a rural state. We don't debate any of those things. But at the end of the day, with basic technologies we've got available, off the shelf right now, Vermonters could be saving hundreds or even thousands of dollars as individual families every year. We spent a lot of time going out into communities and talking with people, and one message we've heard loud and clear is Vermonters want a piece of that. They understand that they have that opportunity to save money, but they just need a little bit of help making that happen. Weatherizing their home or installing a cold climate heat pump or whatever the specific technology answer for them is. So, with that as sort of the backdrop, our proposal is fairly simple. Carbon pollution is causing substantial damage to Vermont and to everywhere else. But right now, that isn't reflected in its price. That price is paid by people who have their homes or farms washed away. It's not actually reflected in the price of the fossil fuel itself. So our proposal and the concept of a carbon pollution tax is to put a tax on fossil fuel distributors based on the carbon pollution created by the fossil fuels that they sell. Our proposal in particular would use 10% of that money to create an energy independence fund that would be dedicated to helping Vermonters save money on their energy bills and cut carbon pollution. The rest of that, 90%, would go directly into reducing other taxes Vermonters already pay. And our proposal specifically would put half of that 90% into cutting taxes for individuals, so every single Vermont family would get a check back at tax time or would have to pay out less depending on how you do your taxes. And every Vermont business would see a rebate based on the number of employees that they have. And that would be true for school districts or municipalities as well. Anybody who is a job creator and employs people. So at the end of the day, we understood this was, if you look around the world, anyone who's serious about dealing with climate change at any level is saying this is the policy. We need to put a price on carbon pollution. Maybe you need to do other things too, but you need to do this. And we decided then, we needed to understand whether this would be the right direction for Vermont to go as a state. So we did a couple of things. One, we commissioned an independent economic analysis from Regional Economic Models, Inc. I just mention their name because they are just about as good as you can get as far as economic modeling goes. It's what the state of Vermont uses, a number of other states as well. And they looked at what might happen to Vermont's economy were we to implement this policy. And what they found was a substantial reduction in carbon pollution, but more importantly, substantial increase in the jobs in the state and in the state, the size of the state's economy. And there's one basic reason for that. This is a policy, fundamentally, that's helping Vermonters reduce their energy bills. 8 out of every $10 we spend on fossil fuels goes directly out of the state's economy. And if we can help Vermonters not spend those dollars on fossil fuels, not spend those dollars at all, that is money that we can keep in the state's economy. And people can use it to buy groceries or go out to dinner or go to the movies. And all of those things are more economically productive for the state. Now, the last thing I'll say, and then I think my time's up, is we actually have some real-world examples to look at, and that's the other thing we did. If you look around the world, places that have implemented this policy have actually done quite well. The most recent, most local example is British Columbia in Canada, where they implemented a policy very similar to this one, put a price on carbon pollution, economy-wide, and over the course of the last 6 years since they did that, their economy's done a bit better than the rest of Canada, despite the fact that they did it as an individual province, just like we'd be doing it as an individual state. And they've seen a substantial reduction in carbon pollution.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Would it help you folks if we slid that table a little bit forward?
I think we're okay.
Okay.
We won't have to do this again, so. thanks very much. It's always great to come out to this Rotary Club. I've seen now both of your locations, and it's wonderful, and I appreciate your giving me a make-up date for my own Rotary, which I'm going to miss tonight. I'm a member of the Stowe Rotary Club. And thanks to Ben for doing this. I think it's a fun program, and I wish Rotaries would do more of this sort of debate format rather than just having one person speak. But when it comes to the carbon tax, let me just say that we at the Ethan Allen Institute, Vermont's free market think tank, are opposed to it for 4 bullet points that I have here. One, it's bad economic policy. It's bad for Vermont specifically in terms of our affordability and our competitiveness with our surrounding states and of course the rest of the country. It's an anti-middle class concept, and just overall it's bad tax policy. We did, when this was proposed by VPIRG and their coalition, the Ethan Allen Institute put together a survey online throughout the state of Vermont. We advertised it on radio stations from Brattleboro all the way up to St. Johnsbury, covering the entire state. We advertised it on Facebook, targeting Vermonters ages 25 and up. It was limited to 1 response per computer. So it's not a scientific survey, but it was pretty good. We've got 1,500, just under 1,500 responses to it. Over 90% of Vermonters that we were able to connect with were opposed to the tax. Under 10% were in favor of enacting the tax, and we had about 1% who said that they didn't know. They didn't have enough information about it. So overwhelmingly, the popularity of this thing is fairly low. Ben was talking about economic development. Well, we've all seen our gas prices drop precipitously in the past year, which gives us a good opportunity to sort of look at what the economy is like without a carbon tax versus what it would be like with a carbon tax if you take it back and forth. The carbon tax that they're proposing would essentially be starting off about a 45-cent tax on gasoline, and that would, I assume, would be something similar to home heating fuel and other carbon fuels. And as it ramps up over time, that would come up to be about a $1.35 tax on gasoline. So gas prices have dropped about $1.35 since over the past year. Has the economy been better with low gas prices or with high gas prices? I would argue that the economy is starting to turn around since we've seen our gas prices come back. In fact, Tom Cavett, who's a state economist who advises the legislature, recently reported that lower oil prices will save Vermonters $600 million in 2015. That equates to about $2,500 per household. And I was listening to somebody on the radio the other day. They said they they were calling into a radio talk show. They said they went to fill up their gas tank, and they'd saved 10 or 15 bucks filling up their gas tank. They said, heck, I'm going to go out and buy a sandwich for lunch. And that's the kind of thing that having low energy prices, low gasoline prices allows people to do. Allows people to have that extra money in their pocket so they can go out and spend. And that's what is going to help our economy. So why would we advocate for a policy that reverses this kind of economic growth that we've seen with low? I don't think that these low gas prices are going to stay forever, but I don't think we should be adding on to them with a carbon tax. And that's not just gasoline, it's also about home heating fuel. People will be using this to heat their homes. Overall, Australia enacted a carbon tax in 2011. They repealed it in 2014. And the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, called it a useless, destructive tax. So they've lived through it. They've gotten rid of it. And that was the Prime Minister's opinion of what it did to his country. So if government is going to have a policy on energy, it should, in our opinion, be one that encourages and allows abundant, reliable, cheap energy. And we certainly do not want to have a carbon tax, which is the opposite of those goals. It's bad for Vermont. I gotta go through quick here because I'm talking slower than I thought. It's bad for Vermont because we're competing with New Hampshire for customers. And if we have a carbon tax on gasoline that's from 45 cents to $1.35, it makes it very economical to drive across the border to fill up your tank. That's according to their rates, that's a $6 to $24 savings on an 18-gallon tank. If you're going to bring a manufacturing company into the state that's energy intensive, why would you do it and a state that has a carbon tax as opposed to one that does not have a carbon tax. It's going to drive your costs up. It's anti-middle class. Why? Because this is really just wealth distribution. If I give you $10 and say I'm going to give you $9 back, I'm taking taking $1 out of your pocket. So this would essentially take $1 out of everybody's pocket and essentially redistribute it to, not surprisingly, the people who paid for this study. And the rest would just be redistributed at the whim of the state. Wealth distribution shouldn't be what we're going after here. Some of what they would allocate that money for would go to make the bottom quintile of people in the economic ladder whole again. That's people who make $25,000 or less. They would get a rebate check from the state paid for by the carbon tax. The rest is sort of up for grabs. Who knows what that tax deductions that Ben's saying that they're going to do. They're going to reduce this tax, that tax. Well, that's going to be based on whatever the legislature feels like doing that day. And overall, I think it's bad tax policy. I think that what we've got with the carbon tax and the sugar-sweetened beverage tax and tobacco taxes and liquor taxes, we're getting to the point where politicians are using the tax code to manipulate our behavior. And we don't think that that is a proper or moral use of the tax code. Certainly government is there to be a moral guidepost, but it shouldn't be using the tax code for those purposes. I think it's an abuse of tax policy. And my last point is that this will not work. Ben's talking about global warming and climate change, and I think it's really disingenuous to say that there won't be any more Irenes if we pass this tax. I don't think that if we pass this tax and Vermont does what it does, it will have one iota of impact on climate trends. It's just not a big enough thing. And even if people follow our influence, nope, there's my time. Even if people follow, I'll just finish that thought, if people follow our influence in New England, in the United States, in other countries, it's still not going to have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rob. Okay, do we have any questions out there? Nobody has a question? Okay. Just go ahead and pass that up. So, all right, so let's start with Ben. We have a question. Would a carbon tax change Vermont demographics, further driving the youth to reside elsewhere?
I would, well, so there's a couple of answers to that question. One, if you're interested, well, so a couple of things. One, I've got just kind of a summary of the policy here if anybody's interested in grabbing one. One thing that I referenced, the study done by Regional Economic Models, Inc., or REMI, they actually, one of the things that their model sort of kicks out based on the variables that they look at is the population impacts. So what they found in the aggregate was, more jobs, and that's in particular in the construction industry, but actually, because you've got a lot more homes being weatherized, things of that nature, but actually, really across the economy, as you see that, money being saved on fossil fuels kept in state, and actually, interestingly, on manufacturing. There are a number of types of manufacturing that are electric intensive but not fossil fuel intensive. We, in our policy, exempt the electric sector because it already pays a price for carbon pollution through another policy called REGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And then, so specifically to younger people, I would say this actually would be a policy that would make it more likely that we'd retain young people. And I say that for two basic reasons. One, young people are, I can speak as almost one, or depending on your point of view, definitely one. Really interested in new ways of getting around, for instance, public transportation, that kind of thing. Living in cities like Burlington, as much as we'd like folks to stay out in the communities they grew up in, this policy would actually potentially, as part of that 10%, put money into things like public transportation. So I guess I'll leave it there, but I'll get to my other point, another question.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Rob, would a carbon tax change Vermont demographics, further driving the youth to reside elsewhere? Well,
as you know, we have a problem with retaining youth in the state, and it's mostly the 18 to 34 demographic that's been trending out of Vermont. Those are people in their prime working age. They're people in their prime childbearing age. So as you see them leave, they're taking their kids with them, and we've watched our K through 12 student population decline from about 106,000 to just under 80,000 since the year 2000. So yes, this is a serious problem, and I think a big reason that these people are leaving is because it's hard to have a job here, and it's expensive to live here. So if you're just starting out, if you're trying to build a house, if you're or own a house and start a family, it costs quite a bit to live in Vermont. And I think that when you start putting a $1.35 tax on gasoline, it's just going to make it that much harder for people to get to work, to get their kids to school. I don't see it helping. There's certainly so many other factors that go into the demographic changes that Vermont is facing right now. And would I say this would be the thing that drives people away, or implementing would be the thing that would fix it? I think that's probably too big a step, but I don't think it helps.
All right. Thank you. Okay, next question. Rob, we're going to start with you this time. What attitudes do you think are affecting us and holding us back from perhaps doing something towards a carbon tax?
Well, I actually printed out, the survey we took, about 950 people actually left comments as to why they did it, and it's 45 pages long, so I only printed out one copy, and Shane has it. I don't know if he's sending it around the tables, but you can look. And people do not want to, they don't want to pay 45 cents to $1.35 for a gallon of gasoline. I think that's certainly holding people back. And I think a lot of the things that I outlined in my original talk are what's holding people back. It's not going to affect climate trends one way or the other if we do this. So, and it's not just the carbon tax. What the carbon tax would be fueling is putting more windmills on our ridge lines and putting more solar panels in our fields. So are we going to be investing in destroying our natural habitat and in the name of saving the planet without actually saving the planet? So it seems like people intuitively understand that this is really has very big implications for what Vermont is, how we see Vermont, and where we want it to go in the future.
Thank you, Rob. And in just a moment, I will go ahead and ask the exact same question of you, Ben. What attitudes are holding us back from doing something like a carbon tax?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing is the status quo. Getting to some of the points that Rob made in his introduction, right now we have a tax base that's based around taxing things that we actually want more of. Taxing people having jobs, taxing people making more money, taxing people owning property. All of these things are things that we actually want more of. We want more jobs in Vermont. We want more corporate profits in Vermont. So we actually think, and this is really when you look around the world, pretty much every economist that's looked at this says this is actually economically, from a tax policy standpoint, a pretty smart way of taxing. If you're taxing the things that you'd prefer to have a little bit less of, and you're reducing the taxes on the things that you'd prefer to have a little bit more of, that's a pretty smart way to go about things. But right now, that's not what we're doing. We're doing it the opposite way. We have a tax structure that's based mostly around things that we want more of, and a lot less around things that we would like to reduce, like carbon pollution. And the reason that it's so hard to change things is because there are vested interests in the specific way that we've set the economy up. That's true for no matter how you had an economy set up. So that's definitely the top thing. Just any significant change in how we go about taxing is going to encounter a lot of resistance, whether it's a good idea or not. Beyond that, excuse me, I would say, and this is, I spend a fair bit of time, 4 months a year in the State House, and this is as true in Vermont as it is anywhere. There really are, there's a pretty powerful fossil fuel lobby even here in Vermont that really is interested in continuing to sell its product. And that's just, unfortunately the way things are.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Okay, you get to answer our next question first, Ben. What is the #1 problem facing the country today?
I thought these were all going to be very specifically, narrowly tailored.
industrial defense.
If you take, I honestly believe if you take the long view, that climate change is actually the single most serious problem facing the United States today. Is it the most problem facing the United States as far as impacts in the next 12 months or 24 months or 5 years or 10 years? No, absolutely not. That's just unequivocally true. And that's actually fundamentally one of the reasons that it's so hard to deal with, because it's never the single most urgent thing that's in front of our faces. But it is, if you are looking at, my wife and I are going to be adopting a child soon, and I want to be able to raise that kid into a world where Vermont is as great, 50 years from now as it is today. And that kind of long-term planning, especially with our political system the way it is on 2- and 4-year electoral cycles, is really tough, a really tough thing for our politicians to do, because they are, for obvious reasons, a lot more concerned about the next thing, the thing that's the crisis in the moment. So let me actually just talk to you specifically about why I think that's true. If you look at the kind of trajectory we're on as far as climate change goes, we're talking about something like 10 degrees of warming Fahrenheit over the next century. And that is something, it's not really, the problem is not that it might be 10 degrees warmer any given day in Vermont 100 years from now. The problem is that, we're fundamentally shifting our climate, and Vermont can't really take too many more storms like Irene. We're going to have more, but we would like to have fewer than we would otherwise.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, your turn, Rob. What is the #1 problem facing the country today?
Well, I would think that the #1 problem facing the country today is we've got a government that's way too involved in our day-to-day lives, and it's crushing the entrepreneurial spirit and the ability of young people and entrepreneurs to follow their dreams and become an economic juggernaut that the country's been in the past. We're sort of mired in regulations and taxes, and if you want, government is making it to the point where young people can't do anything. You talk about change. The things that really drive change are not government policy. It's new ideas and creativity coming from the next generation to from your generation and my generation to your generation to your kids' generation. They're going to be coming up with new ideas, and we need to have a playing field where somebody who is young, I'll take the example of Uber and Lyft. I mean, here are people that are harnessing new technology to figure out a different way to get people transported from one place to another. That wasn't the result of a government policy. In fact, it's being hindered by government policy. But people say, no, you can't do that. You have to have a taxi medallion. You have to do it this way. And that's the kind of attitude that takes the status quo that I agree with Ben. We get too stuck into the status quo. Government is used as a tool to maintain the status quo. It's very rarely used as a tool to break through the status quo. It's entrepreneurialism. It's that American spirit that made this country great that breaks through the status quo. So if you want to solve climate change, or any problem, you want to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit. Not say, okay, well, you get money if you do this because this is politically correct. But if you're doing something different, then you don't get any money. And we're looking at fossil fuels, and I forget to hit my button, so I don't know how time I myself have time here.
25 seconds.
25 seconds. I think I can say this in 25 seconds. Don't forget that when fossil fuels came in, before 100 years ago, Vermont had no trees, because we used all of our trees to heat our homes, and it was sheep ponds. And we denuded the oceans of whales because that's what we used for lubrication and illumination. It was fossil fuels that allowed us to repopulate the ocean with whales, and we put trees all over Vermont. So new technologies are good.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, on to the next question. Rob, we're going to start with you. Would limiting the use of natural resources have the same impact as a carbon tax?
Would limiting
the use of natural resources have the same impact as a carbon tax?
I suppose it would. I'd have to. I'm not going to use my 2 minutes on this one because I don't. That's a very broad question. I said, well, you can't cut trees, or you can't use fossil fuels, or you can't. I suppose it would. Again, you'd have government coming in there and saying you can't use something that you would privately own or publicly own. It seems like that would be I guess we do that to some degree with things like the Green Mountain National Forest. I'm afraid I can't really get my arms around that question enough to give you the kind of answer that I think you're looking for. So
Okay.
I will kick that one over to Ben.
All right, thank you. Appreciate your try there. And how about you, Ben? Would limiting the use of natural resources have the same impact as a carbon tax?
I'm going to echo a little bit of Rob's confusion around the kind of the very broad scope of the question, but let me do my best to tackle it. So I think what the questioner, whoever you are, is getting at is, why are we proposing, a pollution tax rather than just saying you can only use X of this natural resource and Y of that natural resource? And at the end of the day, oddly enough, it's actually because of what Rob was just talking about. And when you look at, when you get home, Google, Hank Paulson carbon tax. This is a Treasury Secretary for George W. Bush. He had a great op-ed in the New York Times about 9 months ago now that really outlines the reasons for this. And the reason that you see conservative economists like him, like Art Laffer, who is a chief economic advisor for President Reagan, coming out and supporting this is because fundamentally it's a policy about making markets work. It's a policy that says, okay, we know that fossil fuels are doing a certain amount of damage to our economy, to our society, to our world. Let's actually put that in the price of the fossil fuels and then let markets sort out how to solve it. Let all the, the entrepreneurship that Rob was talking about, the new ideas, sort out what the best way to reduce carbon pollution is. Right now we have a market that actually can't figure that out because the people selling the fossil fuels aren't the same people that are actually paying for the damage caused by the fossil fuels. So I actually think a pollution tax is a much smarter way about of trying to reduce carbon pollution than just directly saying, limiting the use of natural resources as the question posed.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Okay, you get to answer our next question first. Okay. Do any VPIRG board members have financial interest or direct position in companies that would benefit directly from the 10% holdback of a carbon tax?
I'm going through our board. I can think of one off the top of my head. There might be a couple more. Certainly we have former board members who would, and I have friends who would. At the end of the day, I'm not ashamed to say that our board has people who have made their life's work trying to deal with the problems caused by fossil fuels. At least a couple of them are actually in the renewable, two that I can think of are in the renewable energy industry, and they could theoretically benefit from this. I'd say as we've structured it, they're certainly not likely to be one of the major beneficiaries. Our proposal and the modeling that we did actually doesn't have very much money going directly to renewables. Mostly it would be in the heating and transportation sector, weatherizing homes, helping businesses use fuel more efficiently. We had 1% of the total revenue going to incentives for small solar and none going to incentives for large solar or large wind because those are increasingly cost effective on their own, and we think it makes more sense to directly help individual Vermonters and individual Vermont businesses save money. So yes, but I think that's kind of beside the point. They share a vision of the direction we need to go, and so they're on our board.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Rob. I know this is probably going to be a little bit more difficult for you to answer because you may not know. But do any VPIRG board members have financial interest or directors / positions in companies that would benefit directly from the 10% holdback?
I suggest you flip it,
Yes.
any institute
okay,
benefit from maintain it to the status quo.
Okay.
No, not that I can think of. Just going through my board members, we've got lawyers, retirees, No, I can say that I don't think that we do. But basically what this comes down is when you have a tax, when you have the government coming in and taking a tax, creating a huge pot of money, that pot of money is going to be subject to lobbying, it's going to be subject to political favoritism. That's just the way, whether it's somebody on VPIRG's board or somebody on our board, you're going to have very powerful people swoop into Montpelier and say, give me a slice of that pie. We've seen it happen in the past, and I just don't think that is a fair or efficient way for us to allocate investment funds, period.
Okay. Thank you. All right, next question. Rob, we'll start with you. In absolute dollars, how much money would be raised by a carbon tax per annum?
Well, according to the VPIRG REMI study, it starts out at $35 million that they would raise per year, and $70 million, and it goes up to $70 million over 15 years.
Let me just take a step at this. I mean, if you want to. Is that all right?
Well, those are the numbers that I recall, but you know, it could go up, it could go down. So.
Yeah. So based on the analysis that Remy did, if you're starting at $5 per ton, or about 4.5 cents a gallon of gasoline in year one, that'd be about $30 to $35 million, depending on exactly how you slice and dice it and what's in and what's out. And then that would, over the course of 10 years, if you're getting to $50 per ton, or 45 cents a gallon of gasoline, ramp up to about $250 million. And you might notice that that's not 10 times the revenue over the course of 10 years, even though it's 10 times, you know, it's going up incrementally in a linear fashion. And that's basically because it's doing its job. It's reducing carbon pollution. So you're sort of shrinking your tax base as you go.
All right. Thank you. All right, this next question is actually a couple of different questions rolled into one, so I'm going to go ahead and ask them, and then you can answer them as you see fit. We're going to start with you, Ben. Should we listen to the citizens that say no tax, or should we do what's best for the environment? What is more important?
So I would say we should do what's going to be best for Vermont. I also think that, and you know, Rob did allude to it at least, but that's not remotely a scientific survey. And when you actually do polling on are Vermonters interested in taking action to get to our state's energy goals now, I think our poll was 83%, and that wasn't just, you know, our staff calling. This was a national polling firm. It is polling for, you know, ExxonMobil and presidential candidates and all sorts of different people. That wasn't specifically on a carbon pollution tax, but I am incredibly confident that if you were to do a scientific survey, the results will look nothing like that. And then the other thing that's important to know is, you know, how much information are you actually getting to people? Is it just, do you support a carbon tax, full stop? Or is it like, here's 30 seconds about what this would actually look like, take a minute, think about it, and then answer the question. So I would say we should do the thing that's going to be the best for Vermont, and we should do what people want. And I think were we actually to have the opportunity to sit down with every Vermonter and explain what's going on and what the proposal really looks like, those would be the same answer.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. And would you like to answer that for us as well, Rob? Should we listen to the citizens that say no tax, or should we do what's best for the environment? What is more important?
Well, I think what you have to do if you're going to have a policy like this is you really have to debate it. You really have to take it out to the people. You have to have debates like this and clubs like this, and let people understand what we're talking about, what the implications are going to be for the short term, how it's going to affect your ability to get to work, get your kids to school, pay your fuel bill, versus what the impact of putting such a tax into effect would have on Vermont's climate in the near term and in the long term. I think what people would find is that it's going to have a fairly significant economic hit in the short term, and in the midterm you would see a lot of windmills and solar panels replacing Woody Jackson cows in our pristine ridgelines. And in the long term, you wouldn't see one iota of change in terms of climate trends. So at the end of the day, I think what's best for the people who are saying no and what's best for the state are one and the same.
Mary Beth?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you have time for one more and then maybe your summary.
Okay. Do we have one more question out there?
This is just a very specific one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Rob, let's start with you. How is Facebook part of the survey conducted if on Ethan Allen's Ethan Allen Institute's Facebook page, would that not skew results?
As I said, it's not a scientific survey, and there may be some bias, but we advertised it. We spent some money to boost the post, and we did it in a neutral way. And as I said, we tried to do this in as neutral way as possible. Is there going to be some bias in it skewed towards an Ethan Allen perspective? Maybe so, but people would not be getting the survey necessarily coming to our site. They would get the survey from the link, which was pretty neutral. And as I said, we advertised it on the radio. We just said there's a carbon tax. It's going to lead to an increase in the gasoline price. And is this a good idea or is this a bad idea? That was the action item that we put into the radio ad. And the radio ad was run in Brattleboro. It was run in Rutland. It was run out of Waterbury, Burlington, and St. Johnsbury. So we got a pretty good coverage of the state with that message driving people to our website. Is there some bias in it? I would probably say, yeah, there's probably some bias in it. But we tried to do it as neutrally as possible. And as I said, we got 1,500 responses, just under 1,500 responses, which is pretty good to give you a real sample. If it was like 150 people, I probably wouldn't be showing you the results today.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Ben, this one was directly, pointed at Rob. Did you want to try to respond to?
No, I mean, it sounds like he summed it up pretty well. I guess I'd just say, well, two things. One, I couldn't agree more with the first few sentences of the answer to Rob's last question. I think we really do need to actually debate this and get out and share our perspectives and really make sure that people understand what this proposal would in fact do, what it really looks like, what we're going to be pushing for. And then, I would say, again, a little bit more to the last question, but as far as how that's worded, yeah, of course, if you just talk about one half of the equation, you're going to get people saying, no, of course not. Like, that's not shocking. So, again, obviously not a scientific point.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. What I'd like to do now is just give you each 2 minutes to go ahead and summarize what you would like us to leave here with. So, Ben, because you were not the last one to speak first, I'm going to go ahead and let you go, and then we'll have Rob finish up with the last 2 minutes.
Sure. So, I guess mostly I would just say thank you all very much for giving me and us the opportunity to sort of make our case and try to clear up some misperceptions or just kind of lack of understanding, because this is a fairly new issue. We expect that it's going to be something that's being discussed in places like this one and in Montpelier and around the state for quite a while. I guess I'd just say, again, I want to reiterate this policy. We are committed to making sure that all of the money raised from this policy goes directly back to Vermonters. That most of that go through tax cuts for every single Vermont family and every single Vermont business, and that we help Vermonters cut their fuel bills through this policy. Because at the end of the day, pollution tax and no pollution tax, Vermonters are paying money hand over fist for fossil fuels that over time at least, though the last month this hasn't been true, have just gone up and up. And we need to get Vermonters some help and some alleviation on that. And we believe that this is a good way to do that.
All right, thank you, Ben. And Rob.
Well, again, thank you all for having us today. I think this kind of dialogue is what the state needs a whole lot more of on these issues. So I appreciate your hosting. I appreciate Ben coming and taking time out of a busy day at the State House to do this. And thank you all for a wonderful lunch as well. What I think people will find as they dig into this debate is that what we really want to do is we want to have a policy for energy that is going to get people cheap, reliable fuel sources, both for electricity, both for heating their homes, for moving their cars, because that's really what's going to drive our economy. It always has been. There's a great quote, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but somebody pointed out, looking out through history, life without cheap, reliable energy sources is short and brutal. And when we are artificially raising the cost of energy, whether it be gasoline or home heating fuel or whatever, we are making life shorter and more brutal. It shouldn't be the policy of government to do those things. I understand that Ben has some very noble motives in what he's trying to do. I just think that they're a little bit misguided. But I think we ultimately want the same thing. Nobody wants to have their kids grow up in a Vermont or a world that's full of pollution in our air, in our water, or anywhere else. So just as long as we recognize that everybody's really going for the same goals, we just have different ways of getting there. And this kind of debate will allow us to have a good dialogue about what we really should do in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you both. We really appreciate you coming. And